Welcome back to Pale Shadows. I'm your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you through tonight's tale. I know many of you come here to relax, unwind, and maybe even drift off to sleep. So before we begin, take a moment, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time of night is it for you? Now find a comfortable spot. Let the world slow down around you and allow the story to carry you into the calm. I reached the cabin an hour after midnight, following a road that behaved like a memory, straight until it wasn't, familiar until it forgot me. The lake on my left was a darker stripe of darkness, iced to the shore and breathing a slow, patient fog. My aunt's place was a square of windows on a slight ridge, the kind of simple wooden house that made promises without words, warmth, water, and a roof that didn't leak as long as you listened when it spoke. The map said I'd pass 3-mile markers, but the county had stopped caring about markers years ago. What I counted instead were the trees. Someone, maybe the parks department, maybe a bored person with a can of spray paint, had dabbed bright blue dots on trunks that leaned toward the road. Every few minutes the headlights found one, a neat, thumb-sized halo, a reminder that things out here were seen and tagged even if no one was around to do it. I told myself it was nothing. The way you tell yourself sleep is just around the corner. But the dots lined up just so, as if they understood angles better than a surveyor. When I killed the engine, the quiet felt like a lake settling into its basin. I stood there for a second, with my hand on the key, letting the last tremble of heat tick the vents. The air outside came in quick and clean, doctor cold, and I tasted something metallic I always taste up here, as if the cold had teeth. Inside, I kept the lights low and the heater low too. It's a habit. Invite the night in slowly so it won't bang on the windows. The cabin held its warmth like a held breath. On the kitchen table, my aunt had left what she always left when she knew I was coming. A tin of tea bags, a hand-drawn map in pencil, Don't Trust the Old Trail by the Drifted Birch, and a shortwave radio with a post-it on the dial. For storms, or the opposite of storms. Her handwriting looked tired and stubborn, like someone who knew the difference. I plugged the radio in and turned it just enough to catch a station that wasn't a station, numbers, static, a lullaby of coded weather. Not voices so much as vowels being rehearsed by weather vanes. If you don't sleep much, you learn to let noise become furniture. The radio became another chair in the room, a small one facing the door from a respectful distance. My phone was no help. A single bar waved in and out like a drunk flag. Good. That was part of the plan. I'd come to thin the world to snow, wood, water, and the honest hush between. Before bed, I stood by the window with a mug of tea because that's what the cabin expects, a person-shaped shadow in each pane. The blue dots on the birches across the lane. Had they always been that? Close? In the headlights, they'd been occasional here and there. But now, with the house dark and the outside brighter somehow, the dots were a careless constellation. 6 of them, near enough to braid. I told myself not to count. I counted anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then a 7th in the far periphery, soft as a star behind cloud. I'd learn later the paint wasn't for the county at all. And the 7th dot had never been paint. I slept on the couch, not because the bed was cold, but because the couch knew how to hold a person who didn't trust the night yet. The radio murmured, and the old wall clock moved its hands in brave little clicks. When I drifted, It was down a long stairwell of breath, each step carpeted in snow. I woke at 3:11 to a sound that didn't match the cabin's usual list. Not a beam settling, not an icicle shedding weight, not the plough whispering somewhere on the county road. It was a tap, delicate, truer than timid, at the front door. The polite kind of sound you make when you're afraid of waking a house, but more afraid of not being let in. I didn't sit up right away. There's a rule I keep when I'm north of the frost line. Let the second sound decide who you are. If it repeats stronger, be brave. If it repeats softer, be kind. If it doesn't repeat, be still. It came again. Softer. Like a knuckle reconsidering its own courage. I stood, and the couch sighed the way couches do when they know you'll come back. My feet found my boots but didn't ask for laces. I crossed to the peephole and saw what I expected to see, which is to say nothing. The porch light was off. The lake's fog had found the steps and taken a seat. "Hello?" I asked, because kindness is cheaper than bravery and warms quicker. No reply. Only the radio behind me counting weather in a shy, odd rhythm. When people say the wind answered, they always mean it didn't. But I heard a reply, not words, something between wool and glass, a hush that changed the shape of the hush around it. I opened the door 2 inches. Cold slipped in with a pleased sound, a cat finding an unguarded lap. On the top stair sat a little drift, precise as a folded note. There was no wind. The porch roof overhung by 4 feet. The steps were sheltered. Still the snow had gathered like a visitor who knew where to go. I knelt. The drift's ridge was scalloped, as if something small had pressed a hand into it 5 times, then thought better of a 6th. I didn't touch it. You don't rearrange a message you don't understand. Behind me, the radio clicked to a cleaner band. 11, north, 7, blue, and then static that sounded like a match being struck and blown out by somebody patient. "Okay," I said to the nobody at the door. "If you're cold, I'll leave the foyer light on. If you're not, I'll still leave it on." I set the deadbolt so the door would push but not open, the house's version of a cracked window. I retreated to the couch, and the radio obligingly grew quieter, as if it had been the one knocking and felt seen. Sleep took me without argument. When it gives you a second chance, you take it graciously. I dreamed the lake spoke in digits. It didn't tell me what to do. It only repeated my latitude like a nurse confirming a birth date. When I woke, the clock said 5:40, and the clouds said it would be bright without sunlight. Northern mornings specialize in that. I made tea and toast while the scent of iron and pine traded places in the kitchen. The drift on the step had softened into nothing at all, but something new waited there. A blue dot on the porch pillar, small and polite, still wet, a perfect twin to the ones on the birches across the lane. There were no tracks, not mine, not anyone else's. The porch boards were honest too. They keep secrets poorly, no marks, only paint that hadn't existed when I went to bed. I stirred my tea and watched the pillar, as if the circle might blink. It didn't. Then the radio tidied itself, found a voice that wasn't quite a voice. "Stormwatch cancelled. Repeat. Calm advisory until dusk." The words were wrong in a soothing way. Who cancels a storm and warns you of calm? I walked outside to the pillar and smelled the paint. Not county paint. Something cheaper, a craft store sweetness. I pressed the tip of my glove to it and the colour kissed back, leaving the faintest blue on wool. I thought of children with snow on their cuffs. I thought of my aunt, standing here one winter deciding where to teach me to listen. When calm is the warning, the danger is in the hush between. From the trees a soft tremolo branches deciding how to carry their own weight. Then nearer, something like fabric exhaling, the kind of sound a person makes when they think no one hears them be alive. Are you painting the whole way in? I asked the trees. Or just telling me where to look? The wind moved past my ear as if it had to be somewhere. Far down the road a plough coughed, took a breath, coughed again. I went inside and dressed for the day, which up here means layers that notice you, boots with tread like good advice, and a pocket of matches that will be there even if you never need them. Before I left, I placed the radio on the sill by the front door and tuned it until its static smiled. If you hear the knock again, I told the cabin, be kind before you're brave. The door clicked gently behind me. The seventh blue dot waited at the edge of the lane like a patient thumbprint. I followed it because sleep had softened me into obedience, and because curiosity is a warmer coat than fear. The dots curved left toward the birch brake, then downhill where the lake shouldered up and pretended to be land. At the last one, the paint's circle wasn't a circle anymore. It was an eye, 2 strokes across the dot, quick and human, a blink drawn and left to dry. Beyond the blink, the snow held a depression, the ghost of a footprint, small, not childish, a half shoe, size narrower than mine and pointed slightly inward. I placed my boot beside it, not on it. The snow approved with a soft hush, and there, folded into the track like a pressed flower, lay a match. Unstruck. Its head the same shy blue as the paint. I picked it up, not because I needed fire, but because the message, whatever it was, wanted to be carried. The wood was dry, and the head was waxy, and the stem was as straight as a lesson. I didn't strike it. Not then. On the walk back, I kept checking the trees the way you check a sleeping child, listening for a shift that means rest, not trouble. The radio in the window clicked to a new kindness. 11, north, 7, blue, safe, to sleep. The last phrase broke into static and reassembled as breath. I left the match on the table beside the map. In pencil, my aunt had sketched the old snowmobile trail as a dotted line. I penciled a new dotted line beneath it, the blue one, the one that curved where dots had appeared from nowhere. It would have been easy to feel hunted, but I felt expected. There is a difference, and it is the difference between sleep and the idea of sleep. That afternoon the sky reached down and held the evergreens by their shoulders. I chopped wood, using more care than power, and felt something in my chest unclasp, like a step that finds its tread. At dusk, the calm advisory arrived as promised. The air fell so still the lake could have been listening. I made soup I didn't quite want and ate it anyway, because bodies prefer predictable kindness to dramatic bravery. Then I sat by the window with the radio low and the lights low and the match on the table like a comma between sentences. The knock came just before 10. 3 once, then 2, as if the house itself had taught it manners. I let the second sound decide me. "Okay," I said, "tonight I'll be kind." I opened the door wider than before. The steps were clear. The pillar's dot was a steady coin. In the lamplight. Beyond the porch rail, winter waited the way hospitals wait, confident, capable, patient, to a fault. "I hear you," I said, to whatever had learned to knock. "I hear you and I'm listening." Wind at last. A small one shaped like an answer. I didn't invite it in. Not yet. I set the match carefully on the threshold so that it lay half inside and half outside, its little blue head undecided. Tomorrow, I told the match. Tomorrow we'll see what you're for. I woke before dawn to the sound of the heater. At first, I thought it was the usual metal sighs, the ordinary complaints of pipes meeting winter. But this time, the sound had shape. The heater wasn't just groaning, it was whispering. A pattern, steady as breath. 11, north, 7, blue. It wasn't words exactly, but the cadence matched the radio's strange mutter from the night before. I sat up on the couch, rubbed the cold from my eyes and listened closer. The heater's hum dropped low, then rose again, like a lullaby sung by someone who didn't know they were singing. The radio on the sill was quieter now, almost bashful. Its static folded over itself as though embarrassed to repeat what the heater was already saying. I leaned toward it, half expecting a new code, half dreading silence. Instead, the heater coughed once and then settled back into its rhythm. 11, north, 7, blue. I tried to laugh it off. I guess you two are in cahoots, I told thee. Appliances. But the sound of my own voice was too sharp in the calm, like a knife drawn in a church. I stepped outside, layered against the cold. The sky was the color of tin, heavy and unblinking. I expected wind, but none came. My breath rose and just hovered in front of me, reluctant to drift. The blue dot on the porch pillar stared back. Still wet. Still perfect. And beyond it, in the dim half-light, I noticed a new string of dots curving toward the birches. The dots led me down the lane, across the road, and into a stand of trees that sloped toward the lake. The snow muffled everything but my heartbeat. It felt like the world had pressed a mute button. Even the usual crack of branches under ice, gone. At the edge of the trees, the dots thinned, then stopped in their place. Footprints. Not mine. They began in the middle of a clearing where no path led, no tracks approached, just prints, as if someone had been dropped from the sky and landed soft. They faced the lake. I crouched down. The prints were crisp, shallow, no older than an hour. Too narrow for boots, too deep for bare feet. Something in between. Each step was placed with deliberate weight, but no stride carried forward. Whoever made them had stood still, shifting from foot to foot, testing the snow like a guest unsure of their welcome. I followed them to the cove, a shallow bowl of shoreline hugged by leaning pines. The water there hadn't frozen solid. Thin skin of ice covered most of it, the kind that spiderwebs when you toss a pebble. The prints ended at the edge, not in, not away, just stopped. The calm was heavy now, pressing against my chest. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by the stillness itself. When silence chooses you, it's a different kind of attention. Calm is a mask that fits too well, I whispered, without meaning to. The heater's whisper had followed me here, in memory if not in sound. 11, north, 7, blue. The words didn't echo in the air, but in my blood. I pulled the match from my coat pocket, the one I'd found in the snow yesterday. Its blue head caught the grey light, darker than sky, lighter than ink. I rolled it between my fingers. The urge to strike it was sharp, like a sudden itch you shouldn't scratch. But I didn't. Not yet. I placed it gently on a flat stone by the prints. The wood lay still, the head angled toward the cove. I backed away 3 steps, half expecting flame to bloom without my help. It didn't. The calm held, patient. That's when I noticed something impossible. The prints, the ones I had studied, crisp and shallow, were fading, not filling with snow, not melting, just softening. as though the ground had decided to forget them. I reached for the match, but it was gone. The stone was bare, as if it had never been there. My coat pocket was empty too. The heater's whisper returned, not from the cabin, but from the trees themselves. Branches moved with no wind, bending to speak. The pattern rose around me, 11 north, 7 blue. I turned in a slow circle. The trees swayed through the air was still. A chorus of wooden voices imitating the heater, the radio, each other. I clapped my hands to my ears, but the rhythm stayed inside my skull. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. I opened my eyes and the prints were gone entirely, not blurred, not filled, gone. Smooth snow stretched from tree line to cove, untouched, except for one thing. On the ice, 10 feet from shore, sat the match. Upright, balanced on its head like a gymnast would, pointing toward the sky. I should have been afraid, I should have run, but the calm wouldn't let me. It wrapped me like a blanket, thick and heavy, convincing me this was natural. Ordinary. A simple morning ritual. I stared until my eyes burned from the white. I blinked. The match had righted itself again, closer to shore. Each blink, closer. By the time it reached the edge, I was already backing up the hill. The snow crunched under my boots, but softly, as though it didn't want to betray me. At the porch, I stopped and turned. The match was gone. Back inside, the heater was silent. The radio hushed. Only the clock ticked. I leaned against the door, heart thrumming, and tried to believe I had imagined it. On the table, next to my aunt's map, lay the match. Flat, calm, exactly as I had left it yesterday. But the wood was damp now, and the blue head burned black. The first night, the knocking was tentative, like someone afraid of their own hand. The second night, it was polite. But on the third, it learned. It started just after dusk. 3 taps, then 4. A pause, as though listening to how the house responded. Then another sequence, more deliberate. It was the rhythm of practice, like a student repeating scales, trying to get each note just right. The sound carried not only through the door, but through the beams of the cabin, through the air itself. It wasn't loud, but it was accurate. Every tap landed in the same hollow, the same patient spot. I didn't rush to answer. I'd promised myself. The second sound decides you. And the second sound was deliberate, not softer, not stronger, just smarter. I brewed tea. The cabin filled with the faint citrus of bergamot, steam curling against frosted glass. When I poured a second mug, I knew what I was doing before I admitted it to myself. I opened the door, the foyer light spilling onto the snow. The knocking stopped immediately mid-sequence, as if the unseen hand had been caught cheating on an exam. I placed the mug on the top step, where the drift had sat on the first night. The tea steamed, fragrant and warm, sending up a signal to the cold. "I don't know if you drink," I said, "but I won't let you knock without answer." I left the door cracked, deadbolt set, and returned to the couch. The radio stayed hushed, respectful of the exchange. The heater exhaled softly, steady again, as if it had grown tired of reciting its chant. When I woke in the morning, the mug was empty. No spill, no stain, just clean porcelain, with a thin ring of frost clinging to the rim and something else. On the porch rail, looped tight as a bandage, was my scarf. The one I'd left folded on the chair by the door, waiting for a colder day. It was tied around. The wooden pillar where the blue dot had been painted. The knot was firm, careful, not a child's tangle, not a sailor's coil, more like the desperate grip of someone staunching blood. The scarf pulled against the pillar like a tourniquet on a wound the wood couldn't show. I didn't untie it. Some gifts you return, some you keep, and some you leave in place because undoing them feels like erasing a sentence before you've read it. Sleeplessness changes things. Fear, for example. The first night, fear is a stranger at your window. The second, it's a visitor you can tolerate. By the third, fear is furniture. It takes up a chair, maybe creaks when you shift it, but you stop asking why it's in the room. You learn to sit beside it, sip tea, and let it whisper. Fear doesn't vanish. It just becomes something you dust once a week. That evening, the knocking returned. Same rhythm. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Learning. Testing. Improving. I set another mug out, this time with honey. And beside it, the folded scarf's twin, a wool hat I rarely wore. A fair trade, I thought. Warmth for warmth. At dawn, the mug was empty again. The hat was gone. In its place, the scarf remained on the rail, tighter now, its knot dragged lower, almost strangling the pillar, and the blue dot had doubled. Beside the first circle, another had been painted, still wet, shining under the weak light. 2 eyes now, watching. That night, the knocking shifted again, faster, urgent, like a metronome in a teacher's hand. I sat on the couch and listened. "You're getting better at this," I said aloud, "but I don't know what lesson." "You're learning, or teaching." The radio clicked alive, startling me. Its voice was weak, fuzzy. Just a murmur of static at first, then the shape of words, not sentences, names, or something like names. "Ari, Soren," I froze. None of them were mine. I leaned closer. The heater hushed, as though it too was straining to listen. The radio coughed, then steadied. A clearer word this time. A name, not mine. Kindness can be a lighthouse or a net. I waited for daylight, even though daylight up here is only the night exhaling. The scarf on the porch pillar had tightened another notch while I slept, a careful bandage around wood that had no wound to show me. 2 blue dots looked out from the same post, twin coins of attention, still impossibly wet in air that could have frozen tea mid-sentence. Inside, the radio wore its good behavior like a neatly folded blanket. The dial was where I'd left it, the volume a polite whisper. The heater neither chanted nor sulked. It held its low note the way a hand holds. Another hand steady so the other can sleep. I packed the small things that make you braver without admitting it. Spare wool socks in a coat pocket, a thermos of tea under my arm, my aunt's pencil map, folded hair thin, and the burned match in a little tin, so the blackened head wouldn't mark anything but itself. The lake drew the day's first colour, a band of silver where cloud learned to be water. I told the door the same thing I tell anxieties. "I won't be long. Keep the foyer light on for anyone who needs it." The path down to the birches had memorized my weight. It took it without complaint, returned it without theft. The new blue dots stitched between trunks like patient, drowsy stars. Beyond them the trees broke open, and the lake arrived, flat as if someone had ironed it and left the iron plugged in, heat stored in the idea of heat. At first I thought the sound was wind, pretending to be a choir. Then I realized it was the ice itself, vowel shapes travelling through the sheet, a language with only open mouths. Ooh-ah, ee, long, round, tender. Not a warning, a remembering. The heater had whispered numbers and directions. The lake sang letters taught by pressure, and the need to be more than quiet. I tested the first yard with a pole, then the second, then the third. The ice spoke the way careful floors do, a mild complaint under every step, the kind that means, I feel you more than you've gone too far. The cove had a reputation for late freeze and early thaw. My aunt had circled it on her map with a loaf-shaped line and the note, if you must, follow the patience of the black ice, never the vanity of white. It wasn't white today. It was clear, terrifyingly gorgeously so, 2 inches of firm glass with the lake moving slow beneath it, like dreams you can see from the hallway if you don't make a sound. A foot out, then 3. The vowels gathered under me, a choir rehearsing, a lullaby with no closing line. Farther out, a ring waited. From shore it looked like a stain that had learned how to be a shape. At 20 feet it became deliberate, a circle 1 arm span across, blue as a child's coat set beneath the topmost inch of ice as neatly as a coin under real glass. Not painted on the surface, sealed inside. I knelt slowly so the lake wouldn't think I meant to argue. Cold climbed through my knees and had the manners to apologize. Up close, the ring had brushstrokes, tiny ridges where bristles had laid paint, in the way only a human can. Imperfect, intentional. A ring made by a hand, then preserved there by winter, until winter itself forgot who had asked it to keep a secret. I touched the ice. Not to break it, to greet it. Skin to glass, palm flat. The lake answered with an ooh that rose into my wrist, my forearm, my shoulder, as if it needed bones to be a bell. The heater's chant, 11, north, 7, blue, had lived in my blood since that first night. Now the lake matched it with vowels, ooh, ah, ee, ooh, numbers, directions, colour becoming song. I closed my eyes and let them agree inside me. The agreement was kind. My breath slowed into it without asking permission. I set the thermos beside my knee, watched the steam decide whether to stay or be sky. The ring below me didn't waver. The blue had depth, more than a layer, like the eye of a bruise that healed into itself but refused to change colour. How? I asked nobody, which is to say I asked the ice. When? The first answer was a little crack at the edge of my patience. The second was softer, an E that sounded like a mouth shaping my name without speaking it. It didn't say me. It said a name almost, a vowel away from confession. I took the burned match from its tin and held it over the ring, a foolish, divining rod. The blackened tip wasn't the same blue as the paint anymore, but some part of that colour lived in it like a memory lives in a scar. The ice sang again, this time lower, more oh than ooh. Something in my chest released, the way a held note releases, into what you originally meant to sing. I don't know why I set the match down, perhaps because I had brought it to give back to a mystery that had lent it to me. Perhaps because you are kinder when you return what isn't yours. I placed it on the ice directly above the ring, as gently as I could, as if the ice had breath I might interrupt. The match did not stand upright this time. It lay obedient, a small line across a circle. Ships and sailors would call it a crosshair. I called it a pulse. Things preserved don't always rest, I said, and the vowels agreed in the oldest language, silence that understands you anyway. I waited long enough for the tea to cool a small, sensible amount. Long enough to hear? 2 distant cracks like old knuckles, long enough for my own thoughts to round off at the edges. Then the radio in my coat pocket cleared its throat. I had never used its battery pack before. My aunt had taped a spare to the case with a note. For storms or the opposite of storms. I'd switched it on at the shore without expecting much. Static had been its only offering on the walk out. Static and a kindness I have come to expect from things that hum. Now it found a seam. Safe to sleep, the radio said. Calm as a nurse. Safe if the door is a little open. I glanced back toward the cabin, a small brown punctuation mark against the rim of trees. The scarf at the pillar was a thought from here, not an object. Red around blue, kindness restraining attention. Safe to sleep, the radio repeated. Then, Soren! The name arrived in my ear like a hand on a shoulder you trust. Not surprised, not sudden, not correcting, reminding. The lake gave a small approving oh as if it had been waiting for someone else to say it, so it didn't have to. Soren, I said back to see how it tasted. Softer than stone, firmer than snow. A name whose centre was a door. The heater had spoken numbers. The trees had copied them. The lake sang vowels. Now the radio offered a proper noun, the first since I'd come north that wasn't mine or a neat
element of the world. The Knox had learned enough to be a student. Maybe I was learning enough to be a teacher or a host. I let the name sit with me. It did not become another.
It remained itself, repeating quietly like a heartbeat you barely remember you have. I stood carefully. The match slid a fraction, as if embarrassed to have been seen lying down. I picked it up and put it back in the tin. Not yet, I told it, and hoped I wasn't talking to something else by mistake. On the way back, the vowels followed at a distance, respectful. The ice didn't argue with my weight. The cove breathed in as I left and did not breathe out. Calm held its shape like a pond holds a star. At the birch break, I paused to look for blue dots. There were more than before. Not random anymore, they curved to match the arc I'd traced over the ice, as if someone had watched me and wanted the trees to remember where my feet had been. The last dot stared at the cabin like a period at the end of a line that wouldn't need another. Inside, warmth didn't leap to greet me. It waited, the way good friends wait, there whether or not you're ready to talk. I set the radio on the sill and turned the dial a 1/4 millimeter right. Static vanished into something almost like breath. Then, Soren. Once more, gentle. The heater answered with a single friendly click, a house's version of I hear the name you heard. I made tea for the house and tea for me. I set a third mug on the step outside and stood in the door's small open. Winter looked over its shoulder, then sat down facing me, its hands on its knees, attentive. I don't know who Soren is, I said, to the porch rail, to the scarf, to the blue dots that made the pillar into a face. But you do. The knocking did not come that evening. Calm did. It wore the same mask, and I tried not to be fooled by how well it fit. I cleaned the counter and wiped the table and stacked kindling and moved slowly in the way that tells a house you plan to stay the night. When you live alone for long enough, you learn not to slam any door that isn't an emergency. I slept early, because the name had settled my bones into a quieter drawer. Dreams murmured as if they were considerate neighbors in a hallway. When I woke at 1:15, the radio was still in its chair by the window, still behaving. The heater hummed and did not
spell anything.
Outside, snow tried to start and failed, leaving only its cold behind. I made the mistake of thinking the night would leave me alone because I had let it speak once. At 2:07 the scarf loosened. It didn't untie itself. The knot had been too certain for that. It relaxed, the way a field dressing does when a wound underneath closes a little. I heard it, not the fabric's voice, but the wood's soft sigh of returning blood that was never there. The porch board answered with a low tock, a footstep's syllable without a foot. Not a knock. Something closer. The first sound decided nobody. The second sound didn't follow. I stayed still. Not because of fear, because of courtesy. Something had crossed the threshold of my permission, and I didn't want to startle it. Minutes passed in the slow, moral way only night can manage. The radio cleared, gathered its small courage, and said the name again. Soren. This time the heater didn't reply. The wind did, with a single, modest note through the west eve. An ooh that might have been the lake's way of listening from a distance. I got up and opened the door to its daytime width. Nothing waited on the step but the third mug, empty now,
rim beaded with the tiniest teeth of frost. I lifted it, and the pillar looked thinner without the scarf's grip. The blue dots were duller, as if satisfied or tired, or both. Thank you.
I told the threshold for not being dramatic about letting the calm inside. I left the door on its latch, but not its bolt, and lay back on the couch with the blankets up to my chin. Houses that have taken care of you like to be told when you're going to sleep. I told it. The clock took care of the time. The radio watched the dark, so I didn't need to. Just before the hand reached 3, the shortwave found another seam and, with the tact of someone waking you for good news, spoke a second sentence. Safe to sleep? Sore in porch? I looked. Nothing new. The pillar, the scarf, slack now, the dots that had learned not to shine when they didn't need to. But the wood, when I stared, wore the slightest pallor along a vertical grain, the way skin pales after pressure. A bandage mark. The suggestion of a wound that had never bled. Things preserved don't always rest, I repeated, half asleep, half a promise to not pry. The vowels on the lake rose, fell, and rose again, separated from me by trees and careful glass and a distance that felt invented for comfort. The heater kept its small hand in mine. I slept. It started as a faint awareness. My tracks were mine, clumsy, straight, each step breaking the clean crust of snow. But something else shadowed them, not behind me, not ahead, beside me. At first I dismissed it as the echo of my own steps, the sound of snow carrying across the frozen air. But the impression never faded. When I stopped to look, the feeling lingered. My body told me someone was standing just out of reach, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for me to move again. I forced myself to walk casually. Another 10 paces. Pause. Breathe. I looked down. There they were. A second set of footprints. The tracks weren't identical to mine. They were narrower, toes pointed inward slightly, as if whoever walked with me carried a secret they never dared to speak aloud. And the depth was wrong too light for a full-grown man, too heavy for a child. They kept perfect pace. When I stepped left to test the ground, so did they. When I paused and adjusted my scarf, the second set paused too. Not an echo, not a trick, something present. I bent down, gloved fingers brushing the indentation. The snow held the print like a memory. The edges were sharp, younger than an hour. But when I lifted my eyes, no shape waited beside me. Only the tree line, pines holding their silence, branches heavy with frost. I decided not to head back, Turning away from something that knows your stride feels worse than walking into it. Instead, I followed the dots, those painted blue coins that had begun to appear in stranger places now. Not just on birches and pillars, but on fence posts, the base of my aunt's shed, even on a stone by the frozen creek. The second footprints followed, always there, but never overlapping mine, always near, never touching. I told myself out loud, companions are not always company. My voice was too loud in the stillness. The heater's whispers and the lake's vowels had been languages. This silence was judgment. Faint static from coat pocket radio at noon, I reached the ridge where the pines thinned. From there the lake was a mirror, cloud-coloured, still. The radio in my pocket woke up with a cough of static. Its voice rose in the familiar half-language, then sharpened into clarity. Safe to sleep, porch, Soren, the name again. The one the lake had taught me. The one the radio had said before. I froze. The second footprints froze with me. The radio hissed, as if something had leaned too close to its mouth. Then it said, "Not alone." I swallowed hard. The heater back at the cabin had never lied to me. The lake's vowels were strange but never cruel. But this voice, flat, too clear, felt different. A message, not a lullaby. I turned my head slowly, careful not to spook what might be there. For an instant, in my peripheral vision, I thought.
I saw it. The blur of a shoulder, the dark suggestion of a coat, nothing solid enough to challenge, but solid enough to believe. When I turned to face it, nothing.
The space was honest again, all snow and thin light. But the second footprints remained, pressed down beside mine, as if someone polite had stepped back just beyond the reach of sight. I walked on, and it followed. Back at the cabin, I set the radio on the sill. The heater groaned awake, as if it had been waiting to exhale. The scarf on the pillow was looser again, now hanging almost casual, a necklace on the throat of the wood. The blue dots were duller by day, but still wet if I leaned close. That night, the knocking returned, but it wasn't at the door, it was on the window beside my bed. 3 taps, steady, a pause, then 2 more. I didn't answer. I kept still, eyes closed, listening to the heater hum low, the radio hold its breath. In the morning, the second footprints were there again, circling the cabin like a moat, careful, unbroken. And by the porch, beside my own steps, a single match, weighted upright in the snow. Its head was blue again, no longer blackened from before. Reborn or replaced? I knew then, when I struck it, the air would change. Not drift outward like a candle blown in farewell.
No, the wind would move inward, into the house, into me, filling the silence like a lung desperate for a breath. Drones swelling, then cut to silence. Faint whisper of wind drawing inward. Dusk slid over the ridge like a calm hand smoothing a sheet.
The cabin's windows took on that pewter colour that means the sky is about to decide itself. I kept the foyer light low and the door set on the latch, not the bolt. Hospital rules. A door ajar means someone might need you. The scarf on the porch.
Pillar hung looser now, a red smile slipping.
6 blue dots watched me from wood and birch and rail, dulled by day, brighter by weather. The 7th, I wasn't sure there was a 7th, kept taunting the edge of my vision. Every time I tried to count, I arrived at 6 with the certainty of a person who knows they have 5 fingers and still counts them to be sure. By full dark, the sky was not dark at all. It pulled thin green seams over the lake, at first faint as breath on glass, then richer, like silk drawn through ringed fingers. The aurora gathered itself not as a curtain, but as a quiet colour that whispered in grammar I hadn't earned yet. The ice below answered in vowels softer tonight, more R than O, as if the lake had been told a secret and chose to keep it kindly. I set water to boil and turned the radio a hair left, then right. Static tessellated into a patient hush. The heater kept its small promise. The door remained a little open, the way a good night nurse leaves it, a slot of light you can swim toward if you have to. The radio cleared its throat. Safe to sleep if you keep the door a little open. I didn't startle. The message arrived like a reminder I'd written to myself earlier. I poured tea into 2 mugs out of habit, one for me, one for a presence I refused to name, and carried them to the threshold. Cold slid in and lay down on the rug, well behaved.
As a visiting dog, okay, I said to the seamworks guy, we'll keep it open.
I sat on the inside step and watched the green do what it does best, move while pretending it's holding still. The lake sent up a careful ooh when a particularly fine thread reached toward the tree line and unspooled. Somewhere between aurora and ice, the radio found a seam of its own. "Soren," it said tenderly. Then, "Porch. Safe." I looked to the rail. The scarf sighed and loosened a fraction more. A breeze, or the idea of a breeze, moved in, not out, ruffling the nap of the rug and the hair on my wrist. Calm has a weight to it when it's real. This one settled without argument, like a hand to a forehead checking for fever. I kept my voice low. "If you're cold, drink. If you're not, I'll drink for both of us." Steam lifted and lingered. The aurora thickened, a brushstroke turned ribbon. The heater hummed approval. The door stayed a little open. I took the other mug out to the top step and set it where the drift had once sat like a folded note. The porch board spoke a single syllable under my foot, a talk I now recognized as permission. The black pines along the lane stood with their hands behind their backs, polite witnesses. When I came back in, I laid the burned match and its newer twin side by side on the table. The tin made a soft, hopeful sound when I opened it, as if objects can learn to expect gentleness. The aurora's green was enough light to read by if you were reading the right thing. My aunt's map, penciled thin and stubborn, drank it in and gave me back nothing but what it had already promised. Don't trust the old trail by the drifted birch. And in the margin, the same note she'd taped to the radio. For storms, or the opposite of storms. I had wondered before what the opposite of storms might be. Tonight, with the door ajar and the wind minding its manners, I understood. It isn't calm. It's needed calm. The kind that shows up because something fragile will break if it doesn't. Outside, the aurora stitched and unstitched a hem over the lake. Inside, the heater did not spell, the clock did not hurry, the radio did not brag. I could hear the ice this time without stepping onto it. The vowels travelled through the trees and across the boards and into the small bones of the house. If
language is a village, tonight they met in the square. I watched the door and did not measure the watching. Minutes are kinder when you don't count them. Somewhere near midnight, the radio said my name for the first time. Not out loud, not with consonants, but with a warmth that knew where to find me. Safe to sleep, it added, almost embarrassed.
by its usefulness. I thought about closing the door fully. Habit, it's strong, and it wears the face of good sense. But hospital rules, a door ajar means someone might need you. and I had been needed by smaller things than this. A draft that wanted a path, a house that wanted you to step lightly, a memory that wanted you to say, yes, I see you, I left it. There's a difference between being alone and being left. Alone is a room you choose for the light. It's a chair you pull up to the window because you like the sound of rain performing for the sill. Left is a room that forgets to warm itself. It's a chair nobody means to pull away. Alone can be a cradle, left is a lid. The trick is learning which you're practicing. I came north to be alone. Somewhere between the heater's whisper and the lake's vowels, I realized I hadn't been left. By 1 o'clock, the green had thinned to a fine thread, and the stars remembered themselves. I took the outside mug into my hands, empty, as always, but cold in a way that suggested it had done work. I set it on the table beside the matches and watched the door's edge breathe. That's when I saw the 7th dot. It shone from the lower hinge, neat and wet, a perfect blue coin no bigger than my smallest fingernail. Inside. Not paint I had missed before. Fresh. Moisture sat in its shine like contentment. It hadn't been there an hour ago.
I would have seen it when I checked the latch. I stood, heart suddenly louder than the heater. The second set of footprints from earlier, my side companion, didn't ring the snow around the porch tonight. The boards bore only my steps and a
gentler version of mine, yet the dot existed where no hand should have reached, unless hands weren't involved, unless the blue had learned to go where it meant to go. I bent and smelled the dot. Craft store sweet, the same scent that doesn't belong in air this clean. I straightened. The dot pulsed once, a trick of light made honest by how unafraid it was to be seen. Are you telling me where? I asked the hinge. Or how? The door answered the way doors do, by being itself. It leaned a hair more open, as if to say, it's not my job to decide. I fetched a rag on instinct and stopped short before I touched it. Some marks you clean, some you keep. Some you let move, they keep. Radio, as if it had waited for my hands to hesitate, made its small clearing noise. Safe to sleep if you keep the door a little open, I finished, and the aurora stitched a final line so fine you'd have sworn it was drawn with breath. I sat back on the inside step. The dot gleamed, the scarf on the pillar. Outside relaxed another fraction, a red vowel against all that consonant dark. Calm kept its mask on, and I reminded myself, calm is a mask that fits too well. I had learned that already. Tonight I wore it anyway. Some masks aren't lies. They are instructions. Just before 2, a pressure change rolled through the house, the kind I've only ever felt in crowded churches and empty elevators. Air deciding to be elsewhere, and then deciding to come back. The wind slid inward through the small open door and did not apologize. It warmed as it crossed the threshold, the way a visitor's name warms when you say it out loud. The heater didn't protest. The radio made a happy little click, sonic version of a nod. I set the burned match in the doorway, half in, half out, the new blue-headed one beside it. They lay like a pair of dashes inviting you to finish a thought. I won't light you yet, I said. Not while the door knows its job. The ice sent up the faintest agreement or warning I couldn't tell. The pines stood their guard duty well. The lake remembered to lie still. The sky, relieved of its green seams, stretched out like a healed muscle. I drifted on the inside step, knees to chest, back against the jamb, the tea cooling in my hands, the house holding me up the way old houses do, by having been through worse. I slept with my eyes not all the way closed. The gap of the door made a thin, patient bar of darkness I could look at if the dream required proof. When I woke, something had changed and nothing had. The mug was empty again. The matches remained where I'd left them. The aurora had been replaced by the particular grey that has no name except morning. The heater whistled a happy leak somewhere, and then caught itself. The radio said almost shyly, "Soren, porch, safe, sleep," and then pretended to be weather again. And the seventh dot was on the other hinge now. Not smeared, not dragged. Whole. Where I had not seen it move, where no hand, mine or otherwise, had reason to be. It shone as if it had just been born there. I laughed. Quiet, true. The relieved kind of laugh that belongs to people who understand they are not in charge, and that this is good news. "You refuse to stay where I put you," I said, then corrected myself. "Where I saw you, the door, still ajar, dreamed of being closed and did not act on the dream. The dot kept its coin brightness. The house kept breathing in." I closed my eyes and listened to the small noises you only hear, when everything else has the manners to hush, the cord of a lamp making a private twang, the stair settling one step further into its assignment, the tea in my stomach remembering it had been water once. The difference between alone and left was as clear as it has ever been. Alone is a choreography. Left is a bruise. Tonight had offered me the first and asked me to admit the second wasn't here. I stood, finally, and tugged the scarf on the pillar back into a firmer tie without tightening. Bandages needn't strangle to protect. I touched a gloved finger to the moving dot and felt nothing. The paint was all sight and no texture, a coin you could not spend, only trust. "Okay," I told the door, the hinge, the dot, the nurse sky, the vowel lake, the patient house. "We'll do it your way." The first blue dots felt like boundary markers, distant and external. Trees, fence posts, porch pillars, they told me where not to go or where to look harder, but now they had crossed the line. It began with the porch beam. I saw it as I brought in firewood at dusk, the blue coin waiting just above my head, too deliberate to be mistake. Still wet. The paint shouldn't survive this cold, and yet it glistened like breath frozen mid-air. I told myself, it's
Only one mark.
outside still counts as outside, but later, when I carried the kettle upstairs for a wash, I noticed it, a neat blue dot on the third riser. Interior wood, inside. I stood with the kettle in my hands until steam no longer rose. Then I sat on the step 2, risers below, staring at that little coin of paint. The cabin was being waymarked. Not for me, I already knew the house. These were not guides for eyes. They were permissions for someone, or something, that didn't need light. The heater had quieted since the aurora night, as though satisfied I'd listened to its lessons. The radio dozed too, only clearing its throat every few hours to say, "Soren," like a reminder tucked under a pillow. But the dots, they worked while the house slept. Each day brought a new one, deeper in. By morning, the stair dot had doubled. By evening, one marked the frame of the guest room door. I hadn't opened that door in weeks. My aunt used to keep sewing things in there, and bolts of cloth don't need my company. The map on the table grew heavier under these discoveries, her penciled trails, her scrawled warnings. They weren't about geography alone, they were about entry. I traced her dotted line with my finger, and thought, she knew. She lived here with the dots too. I tested a theory. I left a mug of tea on the marked stair riser, the way I had left offerings on the porch. In the morning, the mug was empty, and the dot glistened fresh again as though rewarded. Invitations, I realized, work both ways. I had been kind. And kindness is a door. When you live with insomnia long enough, you start negotiating with your own walls. You tell the ceiling, if you let me drift, I'll stop counting the cracks. You tell the mattress, if you hold me a little firmer, I'll forgive the cold. Eventually, you learn that doors are not wood. They are agreements. What you allow to come through them has less to do with hinges and more to do with mercy. By the 7th night, the dots had formed a path. Porch beam, stair, riser, guest room doorframe, even the mantel above the cold fireplace. Like breadcrumbs, but blue, not meant to be seen in lamplight, only sensed in a different register. I stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, tracing their line. They converged on the inside of the front door. The very threshold. It shone. There, blue wetness, precise as a seal, just above the bolt I had stopped using. I stepped close. The coin seemed to breathe, though it didn't ripple. I laid my palm near it, not touching, and felt a temperature change, colder than the wood, warmer than the air. The cabin was ready. For what? I didn't ask out loud. That night I left the door ajar again, wider this time. I sat on the couch, blanket to chin, radio at my side. It hummed static, like a man humming to fill silence. The heater clicked once, like a throat clearing before a story. Then came midnight. I froze. The knock didn't belong to the porch. It didn't belong to the boards. It came from the door itself, from the space between inner wood and outer night. 3. Slow beat. Patient, precise. The blue dot above the bolt gleamed as though answering. I didn't rise. I didn't speak. I only listened as the knock faded into the kind of hush that leaves a mark deeper than sound. I told myself the second sound would decide me, but no second came. The house had spoken once. Once was enough. The blue dot on the bolt had not dried. Days passed, tea mugs emptied, scarves loosened, and still it glistened, wet as though freshly painted. A reminder, a waiting. I told myself I wouldn't strike the match. Promises are easy when the thing you fear has patience, but promises weaken when silence asks too kindly. So I stood in the doorway, the tin open in my hand. 2 matches inside, one burned, one reborn. Both had been given back to me. Both asked to be used. I chose the unburned. The blue head shimmered, in lamplight, identical to the paint coin staining my walls, my rails, my beams. I breathed on it once, just to see if it minded. The color did not flinch. The head caught instantly. Not orange, not yellow, blue. The precise blue of the dots. It was not a fire that reached upward. It burned sideways, like a seam opening. The air in the room trembled, not with heat, but with calm. The calm broke gently, like surf folding on a forgiving beach. The wind slid inward through the crack and sighed, content. Then came the knock, not frantic, not rhythmic practice, one single sound from the very wood of the door. It spoke a word, not a word I know, but a word the body recognizes. The sound was what relief makes when it exhales. I nearly wept. Not from fear. From the intimacy of being trusted with something meant only once. The flame lasted longer than physics allows. When it finally sank into the stem, the dots in the house began to dim. Porch beam, stair riser, mantel, hinge. One by one they dulled like eyes closing after watching too long. By the time the match died, the last dot had faded. The house was only house again. I left the door ajar that night, not from obedience, but from gratitude. The scarf slipped free of the pillar on its own and lay like a ribbon in the snow. The wood bore no wound beneath it. The radio murmured, "Soren" once more, then went still. The heater clicked in contented rhythm, no codes, no warnings. The first time since arriving, I slept through until morning. Bravery gets too much credit. Kindness is what keeps the door open without asking for thunder in return. I had been brave, yes, but bravery alone would have sealed the latch, locked. The bolt barred the night. Kindness left the door ajar, brewed the tea, tied the scarf, listened to the knock. Be kind before you're brave. You won't always need both. But when the dark comes asking, it will remember which one you offered first. Morning sunlight spilled. Across the lake, thin but true, the ice sang vowels too soft to record. Calm had shed its mask, and underneath it was something I don't have a name for, something that didn't need me to name it. I picked up the scarf, shook it clean, and folded it back on the chair inside. The cabin smelled of tea and wood smoke. A home again, not a lesson. Be kind before you're brave. You won't always need both. If you come north, bring matches. Not for fire, for answers that prefer a small light.